Section 15 of Abe and Mawruss. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Abe and Mawruss. Being Further Adventures of Potash and Perlmutter by Montague Glass. Section 15. Chapter 11. Man Proposes. "Ain't it terrible a strong, healthy young fellow should go off like that?" Abe Potash remarked, as he and his partner sat in their showroom one spring morning. "I give you my word, I was sitting over in Hammersmith's, so close to him as I am to you, Morris, when it happened." "Was there much excitement?" Morris asked. "I bet you there was excitement!" Abe exclaimed. "Hammersmith sends across the street for a doctor, and you ought to see Leon Sammet the way he acted. 'For God's sake, doctor,' he says, 'couldn't you do nothing for him?' he says. 'He's got a wife and family,' he says, 'and we shipped him $2,000 goods only last Saturday.'" "Did they?" Morris asked. "How should I know?" Abe said. "Sammet's such a liar, Morris. He couldn't tell the truth no matter how surprised he'd be. But one thing is sure, Morris, Gladstein did owe Sammet Brothers for a big bill of goods, and the widow paid them out of the insurance." "Could she do that when the fellow leaves a family, Abe?" Morris inquired. "The fellow didn't leave no family, Morris," Abe answered. "Leon Sammet just takes a chance when he said that to the doctor. As a matter of fact, Morris, Gladstein was one of them fellows, which he ain't got a relation in the world. Mrs. Gladstein neither, except in Russlin. That's the way it goes, Morris. A fellow which he's got so many cousins and uncles, and he gets writer's cramp already, endorsing accommodation paper for him, understand me? Lives to be an old man yet. And all the time his relations and his wife's relations is piling up on him, while a man like Gladstein, which you could really say has a chance to enjoy life, Morris, has got to die." Morris nodded. "Don't I know it?" he commented. "And I suppose the widow sells out the store." "Also her shtuck," Abe said. "She's still running the store and making a fair success of it, too." "Is that so?" Morris replied. "Well, then, why couldn't we get some of her trade, Abe? Bridgetown ain't so far away from here. Why don't you take a run over there sometime and see what you can do with her? Might you could sell her some goods, maybe." "Yah!" Abe exclaimed derisively. "We couldn't sell that woman goods. Not if we was to let her have 'em for the price of the findings, Morris. She's got an idea that she's getting stuck unless we would buy goods from the same concerns that sold Gladstein." "Well, if that's the case, Abe," Morris said, "she could never make so big success there. A feller like Leon Sammet would just as lief stick a widder as not. Liefer even." "Sure, I know," Abe replied. "Then why don't someone give her a couple of pointers about that feller, Abe?" Morris inquired. Abe nodded solemnly. "You know a whole lot about women, Morris, I must say," he commented. "You could give a woman pointers by the dozen about a man, Morris, and swear to him with 6 affidavits yet. And what good would it do? It's like putting a wet paint sign up. Everybody feels the paint to see if it really would be wet." "What for a looking woman is she, Abe?" Morris asked, with an obvious effort at nonchalance. "How should I know?" Abe said. "I only seen her a couple of times. And anyhow, Morris, I don't take it so particular to look at women like Leon Sammet does, Morris. That fellow's a regular Don Quick-Stow, Morris. He's all the time running around with women." "A fellow got to entertain buyers once in a while, Abe," Morris said. "Buyers is all right, Morris," Abe declared. "But I guess I've been in this here business long enough that I could tell a buyer from a model." "That's all right, Abe," Morris said. "Leon Sammet may run around the streets with women, Abe, but that ain't saying he's got intentions to marry Mrs. Gladstein. A feller like Leon Sammet, which he's crowding 50 pretty close, Abe, ain't looking to marry no widders. Young girls is all them fellers is looking out for, Abe. And anyhow, Abe, what for a match is Mrs. Gladstein to a manufacturer? If she expects that she should get another husband, Abe, the only hope for her is some retailer would marry her as a going concern. She couldn't liquidate her business and come out even, let alone with money enough to get married, Abe." "She don't got money to get married on, Morris," Abe rejoined. Anyone would be glad to marry such a woman, supposing she didn't got a cent to her name. She's an elegant-looking woman, Morris. Not too thin, not too fat, Morris, and what a face she got it, Morris. My Rosie was a good-looking woman, Morris, and is today yet. But Mrs. Gladstein, Morris, that's a woman which is a theatre already. You don't see such a looking woman. She could dress herself, too, I bet you. Last time I was in Bridgetown, she's wearing one of our style 4022, which Sam gathered from us, and calls the Lily Langtry costume, Morris, in a navy shade, understand me? And I don't know nothing about this here Lily Langtry, Morris, but I can tell you right now, Morris, she ain't got nothing on Mrs. Gladstein when it comes to looks. Morris nodded and turned to the contemplation of some cutting slips while Abe made ready for lunch. "Say, looky here, Abe," Morris said, when Abe appeared with his hat on. "I've been thinking about this here Mrs. Gladstein, understand me, and I come to the conclusion, why should we give up so easy? Gladstein always done a good business in that store, you understand? And if the widow's such a good-looking woman like you say she is, Abe, there's an opening for her to attract a big trade in gents' furnishings and hats up there, and at the same time keep the cloak and suit end going." "What do you mean attract a big trade in gents' furnishings and hats, Morris?" Abe demanded indignantly. "If you think the woman's a flirt, Morris, you're making a big mistake." "Must a woman got to be a flirt that she should sell gents' furnishings, Abe?" Morris asked with some heat. "That's all right, Morris," Abe said with a scowl. "A lady ain't looking to sell the gents' furnishing trade, Morris." "I know she ain't," Morris replied. "But if a woman is good looking, Abe, naturally she attracts the clothing and furnishing customers. But she don't got to sell those customers, Abe. Her husband can do that." "Her husband can do that?" Abe repeated. "What are you talking about, her husband?" "Sure, her husband," Morris went on. "And especially if a good-looking woman like Mrs. Gladstein were got for a husband a good-looking man like B. Gearin, understand me? The idea works both ways. Mrs. Gladstein attracts the clothing trade, and B. Gearin sells 'em, you understand, while B. Gearin attracts the women's garments trade, and Mrs. Gladstein sells 'em." Abe sat down suddenly and took off his hat. "What are you trying to drive into, Morris?" he asked. "I'm trying to drive into this, Abe," Morris replied. "B. Gearin is a good-looking, up-to-date fella, but he's in wrong with that store of his in Mount Vernon. In the first place, the neighborhood ain't right, you understand, and in the second place, Gearin don't attend to business like he should, because he ain't married, and he ain't got no responsibilities. To such a fella, Abe, when it comes to taking a young lady on theater Saturday night, business is nix, even when Saturday's a big night in Mount Vernon." Abe nodded. "Furthermore, Abe," Morris continued, "if we go on selling B. Gearin, Abe, sooner or later he'd bust up on us, understand me? And we're not only out a customer, but the least he sticks us is a couple of $100. He owes us $250 right now, Abe, since the first of the month already, ain't it?" Abe nodded again. "But you take a young fella like B. Gearin, Abe," Morris went on, "which all he needs is a wife to steady him, and an up-to-date Medina like Bridgetown to run a store in. But understand me, if we could put this thing through, Abe, not only are we doing a mitzvah for all concerned, Abe, but we're making a customer for life." "You mean, Morris," Abe said slowly, "you would try to make up a match between B. Gearin and Mrs. Gladstein?" "Sure, why not?" Morris said. "It stands in the Gemara, Abe. We are commanded to promote marriages, visit the sick, and bury the dead." Once more Abe nodded, and this time he managed to impart the quality of irony to the gesture. "Burying the dead is all right, Morris," he said. "From a dead man you don't get no comebacks, and his relations is anyhow grateful. But if you'd make up a match between a couple of people like Mrs. Gladstein and B. Gearin, what is it? Even if the marriage will be a success, Morris, then the couple claims they was just suited to each other, Morris. We don't get no credit for it anyway. On the other hand, Morris, if they don't agree together, they wouldn't hate each other near so much as they hate us." "Why should they hate us?" Morris asked. "Our intentions is anyhow good." "Sure, I know, Morris," Abe retorted. "From having good intentions already, many a decent, respectable fella goes broke." Morris flapped the air impatiently with his right hand. "Anybody could sit down and talk proverbs, Abe," he said. "I guess I could talk proverbs in my own store, Morris, if I wanna," Abe rejoined with dignity. "Sure you could," Morris replied. "But one thing you got to remember, Abe, while the back number's saying look out before you jump, the up-to-date fella has jumped already and lands on a $5,000 order with both feet already." "I'll tell you, Mr. Perlmutter, it's like this," B. Guerin explained, as he sat in his Mount Vernon store that evening. "Money don't figure at all with me." "Where is the harm supposing she does got a little money, Guerin?" Morris protested. "And anyhow, never mind the money, Guerin. We will say for the sake of example she ain't got no money. Does it do any harm to look at the woman?" B. Guerin passed his hand through his wavy brown hair, cut semi-pompadour in the latest fashion. There was no denying B. Guerin's claims to beauty. "What's the use talking, Mr. Perlmutter?" he said, carefully examining his fingernails. "I'm sick and tired of looking at 'em. Believe me, I ain't lying to you. If I looked at one, I must have looked at hundreds. The father's was rated at the very least D to F, first credit, and what is it? To most of 'em I wouldn't marry, not even the rating was A1 even. Such faces they got it, understand me? And the others, which has got the looks, you understand? You could take it from me, Mr. Perlmutter, they couldn't even cook a potato even." "Girls which they got D to F fathers don't gotta cook potatoes," Morris commented shortly. B. Guerin shrugged. "For that matter, Mr. Perlmutter," he said, "I don't take it so particular about my food neither." "Say, looky here, Guerin," Morris exclaimed. "What's the trouble with you, anyhow? First you're telling me you don't care about money. Next you're kicking that the good-looking ones couldn't cook, you understand? And then you say you ain't so particular about cooking anyway. What for a kind of girl do you want, Guerin?" Guerin continued to examine his fingernails and made no reply. "Because, Guerin," Morris concluded, "if you're looking for a homely girl, but she ain't got no money and couldn't cook, understand me, I wouldn't fool away my time with you at all. Such girls you don't need me to find for you." B. Guerin sighed profoundly. "You shouldn't get mad, Mr. Perlmutter," he said, "if I tell you something." "Why should I get mad, Guerin?" Morris asked. "I'm coming all the way up here, which I'm leaving my wife and boy at home to do so. And maybe you don't think she put up a holler, Guerin. So if you wouldn't even consent to do me the favor and look at Mrs. Gladstein, Guerin, and I don't get mad, understand me, why should I get mad if you would tell me something?" "Well," Guerin commenced, "it ain't much to tell, Mr. Perlmutter. I guess you hear already why I'm coming to this country." Morris elevated his eyebrows. "I suppose you're coming here like anybody else comes here," he said. "Sooner stay in the old country and be a schnorrer all your life you come here, ain't it?" "No, sirree, sir," Guerin replied emphatically. "If I would stay in the old country, Mr. Perlmutter, I don't got to be a schnorrer." "Do you know Louis Moses, the banker in Minsk?" Morris nodded. "That's for me or an uncle, verstehst du?" Guerin said. "And Zach's, the big corn merchant, that's also an uncle. My father ain't a schnorrer neither, Mr. Perlmutter. In fact, instead, I am sending home money to Rushland. Like most fellows which they come to this country, Mr. Perlmutter, my people sends me money yet." He jumped from his chair and went to the safe, from which he extracted 2 crisp Russian banknotes. 100 rubles apiece, he said, and his face beamed with pride. "So you see, I don't got to leave Russellin because I'd be a schnorrer over there." "No," Morris replied. "Then why did you leave, Guerin? So far what I could see, you ain't made it such a big success over here." "You couldn't make me mad by saying that, Mr. Perlmutter," Guerin commented. "A big success or a big failure, it makes no difference to me." "It makes a whole lot difference to me," Morris cried. "Yes, Mr. Perlmutter," B. Guerin went on, disregarding the interruption. "I ain't coming over here to make a big success in business. I'm coming over here to forget." "To forget?" Morris exclaimed. "What do you mean, forget?" B. Guerin ran his hands once more through his pompadour and nodded slowly. "That's what I said," he repeated. "To forget." Well, I hope you ain't forgetting you owe us now $250 since the first of the month yet, Morris commented in dry, matter-of-fact tones. B. Gearin waved his hand airily. I can forget that easy, Mr. Perlmutter, he said, and Morris winced. But the rest I couldn't forget at all. Day and night I see her face, Mr. Perlmutter, and such a face. Here he paused impressively. Nah, he exclaimed, and kissed the tip of his fingers, while Morris glanced uneasily toward the door. Her name is Miss Polania, and her father keeps a big flour mill in Korolichevitsi, Mr. Perlmutter, Gearin went on. A fine family, understand me, and I'm going out there from Minsk twice a week when a young fellow by the name Lutsky, a corn broker yet, you understand, comes to sell her father's goods. Again B. Gearin paused, his left hand extended, palm upward, in a tremulous gesture. Suddenly it dropped on his knee with a despondent smack. In 2 weeks already they was married, he concluded, and me, I'm coming to America. You ain't coming to such a bad place, neither, Morris rejoined, even supposing your uncles was such big machers in the old country. Places is all the same to me now, Gearin said. Women, too, Mr. Perlmutter, I assure you, Mr. Perlmutter. Since the day I'm leaving Minsk, one woman is the same as another to me. I ain't got no use for none of 'em. Get back, Gearin, Morris cried impatiently. You talk like a fool. Just because one lady goes back on you, understand me? Is that a reason you wouldn't got no use for no ladies at all? You might just as well say, Gearin, because one customer busts up on you, you understand? You'd never try to sell another customer so long as you live. Now, this here Miss Gladstein, Gearin, is a lady, which, while I never seen this here lady in Russlin, you understand, if you will just come out to Bridgetown with me, Gearin, I give you a guarantee Russlin wouldn't figure at all. Gearin shook his head sadly. You don't know me, Mr. Perlmutter, he said. Well, I'm going with plenty shotchins to see young ladies already, Mr. Perlmutter. I assure you my heart ain't in it. People get the impression because I'm a swell dresser, Mr. Perlmutter, that I'm looking to get married. But believe me, Mr. Perlmutter, it ain't so. Then what do you go for, Gearin? Morris asked. Shotchins don't like to fool away their time no more as I do, Gearin. You could take it from me, no girl is going to the trouble to fix herself up and make a nice supper for you and the Shotchkin simply for the pleasure of seeing a swell dresser, Gearin. That's just the point, Mr. Perlmutter, Gearin said. A fellow which runs a store like this one and eats his meals in restaurants, understand me, must got to get a little home cooking once in a while, ain't it? Why not get married and be done with it? Morris retorted. And then you can get home cooking all the time. Once more, Gearin shook his head. Without love, Mr. Perlmutter, marriage is nix, he said. Schmooze, Morris exclaimed. Do you think I got married? I loved my wife, Gearin. Oh, so her shtuck, and today yet I'm crazy about her. With a businessman, Gearin, love comes after marriage. B. Gearin rose wearily to his feet and shot his cuffs by way of showing impatience. What's the use talking, Mr. Perlmutter? He protested. When I want to get married, I would get married. Otherwise not. He flecked away an imaginary grain of dust from the lapel of his coat and walked slowly toward the door. Are you going home on the New Haven Road or to the Harlem Road? He asked. Morris scowled, and his indignation lent such force to the gesture with which he put on his hat that the impact sounded like a blow on a tambourine. Schon gut, Gearin, he said. I'm through with you. He paused at the doorway and lit a cigar. And one thing I can tell you, Gearin, he concluded. Either you would send us a check the first thing tomorrow morning, or we would give you your account to our lawyers, and that's all there is to it. He puffed away at his cigar, and he trudged down the street. And he had nearly reached the corner when he heard a familiar voice shouting, Mr. Perlmutter. He turned to view B. Gearin hastening after him. Well, Gearin, he grunted, what do you want now? Gearin stopped and gasped for breath, and Morris's heart gave a triumphant leap as he noted the anxiety displayed on B. Gearin's clean-shaven features. Speak up, Gearin, he said. I got to get to my train. Guerin smiled in surrender. "All right, Mr. Perlmutter," he murmured. "Make for me a date and I'll look the lady over." End of section 15.